Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I feel like I've been having a lot more connection with my listeners through the Q&As and polls. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Hi, I'm Father Daniel Duplantis, a Catholic priest, martial artist, and host of the Karate Priest podcast. Have you ever wondered what the church teaches about different topics? Are you a martial arts enthusiast or just someone who wants to learn more about martial arts? I'd like to invite you to join me and many guests on my podcast as we cover topics of faith, everyday living, and martial arts on the Karate Priest podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Season 4 of A Catholic's Perspective, the podcast all about being a young Catholic surviving in a secular world. Today, we are going to be talking about how to reach fallen away Catholics. And to talk about that, we have Keith Nestor. Welcome, Keith Nestor.
Well, thanks for having me, Amber. It's good to be with you here today.
Of course, yeah, it's great to have you back. You've been on my podcast a couple times. We've done some live streams together. It's just, I always feel like when we do talk, we learn so much and we just get so much out there for people.
Well, I know I do. I always learn something new when I talk with you, so I'm appreciative of the opportunity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So for those who might not be familiar with you, do you want to introduce yourself to them?
Sure. So I was a Protestant pastor, ministry worker for about 22 years before I became Catholic in 2017. So I had a conversion experience. And about a year after that, I started doing some ministry stuff. I wrote a book called The Convert's Guide to Roman Catholicism, Your First Year in the Church. I have a podcast called Catholic Feedback, and also another one called Unpacking the Mass, which is a Bible study. I travel around and give talks at parishes and conferences and things like that. And I wrote a new book last year called Unpacking the Mysteries of the Rosary, which grew out of our daily live stream rosary prayer group called the Rosary Crew, which we've been praying live on my YouTube channel, my other YouTube channel, since March 17th of 2020. So we've been at it every day for well over 3 years now, and it's been absolutely awesome. I travel around in an RV, praying the rosary with different people across the country, and I have 3 kids that are adults, a wife, Estelle, who travels with me, and we are just so excited to be part of what God's doing in the Catholic Church.
That's wonderful. And yeah, you sent me a copy of your book, the Rosary book, and I love it. So
Oh, thank you so much.
it's fantastic. I'm really excited about it. And I think if we're correct, we're going to have you on the book club to
Yes,
discuss it as well.
I
Which is gonna be
look forward to that.
Yeah, I'm so excited to announce that because people are going to flip out because a lot of my followers love you. So like they're going to be so excited to have you on there. So that's
Oh, I can't wait.
that's
I
going to
just
be
finished the audio for the audiobook for that.
No
and,
way.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. That's fantastic. Now I want the audiobook. No, I'm just kidding. I listen to podcasts too, but no, that's fantastic. And the work that you're doing for the church is amazing. You can truly see how you're reaching souls. So thank you for your work. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. But yeah, I guess just kind of jumping into our topic here, fallen away Catholics.
Yeah.
I was a fallen away Catholic. You're a convert.
Mhm.
So we're both on different spectrums, but almost the same in a sense. We both came into the church. I had more of a background with Catholicism, but have you run into fallen away Catholics in your ministry at all?
All the time. I talk to people who, and I don't know how they end up at my events or different things like that, but I run into people who know what I'm doing and they're just like, oh, I used to be Catholic, or I grew up in Catholic school, or this or that or whatever. And for one reason or another, they want to talk to me about, why would you become Catholic? I left. So yeah, I do run into people who have fallen away.
Wow, that's fantastic. I mean, it's really hard too because when you do run into those people, it's like almost like, what do you say to them, when they tell you those things? And I've only ran into some fallen away Catholics online who tell me like, I left the Catholic Church. I don't necessarily run into them in person at my events, but to be able to do so is such a wonderful thing to be able to minister to those people. And according to the Catholic News Agency, they stated that there's been like a 20% decline in practicing Catholics since the early 2000s. And I'm like, it just seems like, for every one Catholic that joins, 3 Catholics kind of like fall away. And why do you think that is?
Well, I'm surprised it's not worse. It might actually be worse than that. But I think what's interesting is just as people who are converting to the Catholic faith do so for different reasons, I think people fall away for different reasons too.
Mhm.
So when you talk to people, you have to really understand, well, why did you fall away? Some people fell away gradually, and it wasn't because they had this moment where they were like, oh, I don't want to be Catholic anymore. I hate Catholicism. They just got into bad habits, or they started slacking in the practice of their faith. Maybe they went to college and nobody was making them go to mass anymore. And they just sort of slid in this slow fade away from the church until one day they're just like, yep, I guess I'm one of those fallen away Catholics. But they don't
Mhm.
necessarily harbor animosity toward the Catholic faith. They just kind of fell away from it. There are others who had more of a dramatic break from the church. Maybe something happened to them personally with a bad experience that they had, and that was what drove them away. It wasn't about what the church teaches or some kind of doctrinal aspect of the church. It had to do with their own personal experience. And they were like, well, this happened to me at this point in my life. I was a strong Catholic, and then this happened, so now I'm leaving.
Right.
And then there are other people that fall away because they've been lured away for theological reasons. Like, let's say they weren't very, very sure of their faith or whatever, or why they were Catholic, and then they heard a Protestant or anti-Catholic give them some, well, actuallys about what's in the Bible or what the church does or this or that, and then they were enchanted and pulled away by that. And it's funny because I've interacted with people from that group, with those different groups a lot, like in the last even just few weeks, talk to people who are those situations. So I think it's important to recognize there's probably not one overarching reason. There's a lot of little different reasons. I shouldn't say little. There's a lot of different reasons why people fall away. And if you want to know how to minister to those people, you have to find out what their story is.
No, it's so true. And also, what you said about going to college and falling away from your faith, it resonates with so many people because that's what happens. They would go to church as a family and now they don't have anyone to hold them accountable. So, because they have no one to hold them accountable, and most of these, colleges are very secular, parents are trying to figure out how to keep their kids in the faith when their kids are adults. And it's like, you can't force your kids to stay Catholic or become Catholic, but bringing them up in the faith is something that they could value and eventually come back to. And that's kind of how it was with me. It's like I didn't go away to college. I did online college, but we fell away from the church as a family in the early 2000s, 2000, 2010s ish area. And it was because of all the scandals that were going on at the time. And so because of that, we didn't know how to handle it. And we just kind of decided, well, the best thing to do was to leave. And instead, that's what kind of, I guess, slingshot me into all of this new age stuff. And, you get introduced to things like pornography and stuff like that, and you don't know how to handle it because eventually your kids are going to be exposed to those things. But I mean, if they don't have a foundation or don't know about it, they're going to be blindsided by it and they're going to learn what the world teaches about that stuff. And so, reaching these fallen away Catholics, like you said, there's a bunch of different things. And like becoming a friend to them first is really how we can minister to them properly. And that's something that I've noticed is the people who comment those things online, the people who are like, oh, I used to be Catholic, like, and I'm not that anymore. They do harbor some sort of resentment. And I always wonder, I'm like, but what is that? But over the internet, nobody's really going to let their walls down enough to tell you. And that's the hard thing about being on the internet, is that you don't have that personal connection with somebody. Um, so it can make it very difficult to reach those people online unless you have a platform, I suppose.
That's so true. And that's sort of the shortcoming of that. And when you're listening to someone's story, you have to sometimes hear the story behind the story.
Mm,
So if I'm talking to a young person who was brought up in the church and then has left for whatever reason, I want to know, okay, well, what was your upbringing like in the Catholic Church? Did you feel good about it? Did you like that experience? Or were you one of those kids that couldn't wait to leave? Because sometimes in those situations, the whole leaving the church is just part of leaving mom and dad.
mm,
And they want to express their own opinions, their own independence, and figure things out for their own or on their own. And if they've been handed Catholicism since they were born, and now they're venturing out into the world on their own, they want to question everything. And if they run into people who say, "Oh, well, did you know this? Did you know that?" They're going to go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that." And I've
mm.
seen people fall away for those reasons. And so you have to really try to, get to know that person and their story, which, like you mentioned, Amber, is really hard to do in the context of a YouTube comment section or an Instagram
Yeah.
DM. So there are shortcomings to what we can do in that world. So we have to try to address whatever specific things are being brought to us at the time. If
Yeah.
someone says, "Oh, I left the Catholic Church because it's unbiblical." Okay, well, let's figure that out. What does that mean? And then go from there. But the best way, I think, to reach these fallen Catholics is to reach the ones that God has placed in your path.
Mm,
And that's who you're going to have an opportunity to deal with, and to do the best job with that you can, understanding there's only going to be a limited number of people you can interact with at that level.
absolutely. No, I love that. Like, the people you can minister to are the ones in your own path, because it's true. God will put people in our lives, and he doesn't do it for no reason. It's not
For
just by
sure.
chance. It's a God incidence. It's not a coincidence. I don't know how to say it. Anyway,
Coincidence.
coincidence. Thank you. It's early. But yeah, and so it's so important that we do, pay attention to the people in our own lives. I think a lot of times we go outside of our own families and outside of our own friends, and we try to minister to strangers, but in reality, like, the greatest work that can be done is in the circles we already currently have. And if other people come across you, then great. But I do think that we need to minister to the people in our own lives, if possible, at least.
Yeah, this is so interesting because you know how Jesus makes that comment. He says a prophet has no honor in his own home. And I've discovered, like, in my ministry, I can have a lot more impact with some people that aren't in my own home,
Mm,
in some areas, but in other areas, I can have a way greater impact on those that are. And when I say in my own home, I don't mean in my house. I just mean in my world that I can know personally.
right.
There are some ways where I can do way more with people that are in my life in person. And then there are some ways when I can do way more with people that aren't like that. But I think that things that require a real, true relational example, which we're going to get to in a minute, that's what you can't do that online. You can present that to people in a limited context, but because people can watch your content or listen to you and think that they really know you personally, and they can to a certain degree, but not in the same way that people who are in your real life can.
So true. Absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the things, is like, having a social media platform really helps you to reach out, but then also keep your own circle and minister to both. And I do think that it can be more difficult to minister to family in certain circumstances, like you said, because they are family, especially if they have different views and stuff. You don't want to burn any bridges, but also you feel more comfortable with families, so it can be really difficult. But coming back to, like, the college students and them falling away because they don't want to do what mom and dad have been doing and exploring. Do you believe that society has a role in people falling away from the faith?
Oh, 100%. Because, especially if you look at, like, our society today, what is the most valuable thing in our society today? Okay. And this is changing a lot. I'm going to argue that from the standpoint of what society values the most right now is complete autonomy and individualism, the ability to create your own truth, the ability to do things the way you want to do them, and no one can infringe upon that or make any kind of truth claim that affects your life. That's what seems to be the most important thing in our society. And when that value is placed forward, okay, as well, it's your truth. I mean, and we've all seen examples of this in our society where it's like, okay, you can't tell me anything about me. I get to say whatever, and you have to agree. Okay. And of course, we've all seen plenty of examples of that. Well, the Catholic faith is I would say, the polar opposite of that in some sense, to where truth is received and revealed by God, not created by one's own sense of self or preferences or opinions. But it's revealed and it's received and it's not negotiable. You don't get to say, well, that's not my truth. In Catholicism, truth is just truth. And how we feel about it is really irrelevant to whether it's true or not. Beyond that, there's also this authoritative aspect of Catholicism, which instantly people go, "Ooh, I don't like that." But authority is a good thing because it keeps us safe. It keeps us in the bounds of what's real and what is the will of God. But that in and of itself is going to be a turnoff to people in our society. And so therefore, people who are being influenced by our society they're going to like full stop right in the beginning of, oh, well, you're going to tell me what's true, then I don't want any part of that.
Right. It almost takes people coming out of themselves, and it takes humility, which is something that is not in today's world.
No.
We're literally, when we're recording this, it is Pride Month after all. It's the month of the Sacred Heart, but, they've literally created, a holiday surrounding sin, surrounding a mortal sin. And so anyways, and yeah, we see that relativistic lifestyle everywhere today with abortion, OnlyFans for girls and like all that stuff. They're just like, oh, well, I do it because I want to do it. And it's like, no, actually, that's not how it works. There's just so many things in today's society that comes back to what you were saying about that individualism and relativism and my truth is my truth, but you can believe whatever you want to believe. And the Catholic Church really calls us outside of ourselves to humble ourselves and to realize that we are not the end all be all. At the end of the day, we're not that important or special, in any way. I mean, we're special to God, sure, but we really need to understand that, we have a place in this world, and we cannot just throw truth to the wind because we cannot claim, ignorance. I think a lot of people like to claim ignorance these days. And that's a huge issue today is people claim to be blissfully ignorant, but I believe they actually know, and they just don't know how to humble themselves. And you humble yourself by becoming Catholic and practicing virtues and things. But, virtue is seen as almost demonized these days. If you have virtue or virtue is being out there, there's now like virtue signaling. And people have kind of connected virtue with being a negative thing where they're like, oh, all these sins, like, look how we've turned those things into good things. And I think it's really, really confusing for the younger generations that are coming into this. And I honestly don't know what to expect from them when they become adults.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because it seems like the younger generation is being brought up with this relativistic, individualistic mindset. But if you look, it's people that are in my age category that are paving the way for this. And I wonder sometimes if there's going to be a tipping point, and I think that there will be, where people in your generation go, all right, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
This hasn't worked. All of this so-called freedom and so-called autonomy, it doesn't work because it's the same thing. Now, in my generation growing up, the freedom was viewed differently, right? It was, I'm going to make my own decisions, but I don't get to create my own reality.
Right.
So it's like this slippery slide into, well, now your generation is like, well, I'm creating my own reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about, well, I want to do what I want to do. It's you can't even tell me what's real anymore, which eventually I think is going to self implode. And I wonder if there will be a tipping point where maybe your kids' generation is going to be like, man, you guys were crazy. But you never know. But see, it all goes down to this one particular thing. And this is the aspect of us that doesn't change, that really is the reason beyond the reason of why people fall away from their faith, is that we're all sinners. And we've all got this desire deep within us to have it our way. And to be Catholic, at the core of that, is to surrender that.
Right.
And I think that's hard for people, because we're still convinced that if we're in control, if we're in charge, then we'll be better off. But all you have to do is look at societies. The more people have been given their so-called freedom, the more disastrous you see, because that's an illusion anyway. Because for people who say, well, I just want to create my own reality, they want to create that reality for me too. Because it's not just about, and this is where my generation kind of was like, okay, fine. If you want to, like, we can talk about the whole gender thing for a second. If you want to decide that you're of a different gender than what you were born with, I guess if that's what you want to do, whatever. But I'm not going to buy into that. I'm not going to believe that you are that. Well, now it's like, no, you must. I've not just created truth for myself. I've created it for you as well. So to me, that's already a signal that people are realizing that this so-called autonomous freedom doesn't work. Because if it truly did, Amber, then nobody would be demanding that anybody else call them by whatever pronouns they choose for themselves.
True.
Right. So my generation was more like, hey, you do you, I'm doing me. That's fine. Whatever. And I don't have to buy into your stuff. You don't have to buy into my stuff. Well, your generation is now saying, no, I'm deciding what's true, and you must affirm that, which is really just another truth claim.
Yeah, with no foundation. It's a truth claim without foundation. It's just an opinion.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's going to implode upon itself. And it already kind of is. I see it around me, and I could tell you plenty of stories if we had more time, but I had a very interesting conversation with someone about that just the other day, as a matter of fact,
really?
That they had no answer to. But I think that's ultimately where it comes from, is the desire to like where it all started in the garden. Well, did God really say? And I want to have that knowledge. I want to have that freedom. I want to do the thing that you said I couldn't do.
Yeah. And it's so crazy how history keeps repeating itself, because it's human nature, right? Like, it goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. It's in our nature. And yet we get tricked every single generation or so, because it comes over and once we defeat something like this, it comes back under a different font, and people are like, oh, that looks good. Let's go with that. And what we really need is God. And this younger generation that's coming in, like you said, I do think that my children's generation are going to be the ones who are just like, yeah, you guys were psycho, like, what on earth?
I think you're right. I mean, let's be real though. I mean, just about every generation says that about the one before them, but
yeah.
But I think in your kids' generation, I think that's going to be very, very pronounced. They're going to look back and go, what the heck were you thinking? Allowing men to compete in women's sports. They're going to be like, you guys are nuts. We're not doing that anymore.
I hope so. And honestly, I think a lot of people are coming around. I mean, we have young people like Brett Cooper, a couple other people, online who have been talking out about this. And, my generation, almost in a sense, and a little bit younger than me, seems to almost like be defying the odds and coming back to the faith. I mean, I was one of them about 3 or 4 years ago. And that kind of surprised me, even till this day, that I came back. Not because I was like, oh, this is something that I didn't want. No, it's something I wanted, but I'm still surprised that I look around the world today and I see all of these young people. I was just at the Dobbs rally for Roe v. Wade being overturned. And, there were so many young people on the, pro-life side, but on the opposing side, the people who were, counter
Mm-hmm.
protesters, they were all like old men and like,
Yep.
yeah, and some trans people and like a couple old women who were in their like 30s maybe, and somebody's grandpa. I
Wait a
don't know
minute. Hold the phone a second. Did you just say old people in their 30s?
maybe. No, I'm going to be 30 in like 6 years. I'm not okay.
Wow.
But like the somebody brought their grandpa. And I was just like, somebody take their grandpa out of here. Like, why did you bring your grandpa to this? And he's just sitting there and he doesn't know what's going on. He's clearly like very senile, probably in his 80s. And I was just like, oh, but yeah, there were like, I don't know, there were what is 30 these days? Gen X?
I don't think
Millennial?
30 is Gen X. I think that's millennial. Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Because you're Gen Z, right? You're Gen
Yeah.
Z.
I always
So-
think that I'm younger than I am. So
You're Gen Z. The millennials would be between your generation and my generation. So I'm Gen X.
okay.
And I'm 48. So there's like that generation between you, which I think is weird. It feels to me like there's too many generations. Like I don't think there should be a generation between my generation and your generation, because like you are the age of my kids.
Right.
So that's the next generation, right?
Mhm.
So it seems weird to me that there's a generation between, because I'm too young to have Gen Xers. Well, sort of. So it just, I don't know. It just seems weird to me, but that's kind of, it seems like a generation used to be every 40 years. Now it feels like it's a generation like every 15 years.
Yeah, or 10 years at this point. I mean, now there's like, they call it Zoomers because like I'm on the cusp too. I could have been a millennial, 1999. My sister, on the other hand, is a millennial. She's 27 or 28 now, I believe.
Yeah, she's probably right at the tail end of that, the top, or the bottom end of that.
And it's so odd, like you said, like having so many generations, because I'm like, well, now what? Like, what is the next generation called? But that's something that is just crazy to me, that there were so many like young people on our side, and on the other side, it was all like Gen X. There was like no Gen Zs at all on their side, at least from what I could see. And most of them were just older men, probably in their 50s, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Like, my generation, first of all, people who are social justice warriors or whatever, that's their identity. So they have to figure out like what is sacred to them. And they're always going to be fighting for some cause. They're always going to be out there advocating for some pet cause or whatever. And Roe versus Wade happened kind of towards the beginning of my lifetime, right? So they grew up with that as sort of the air you breathe.
Right.
And when they saw that change, they viewed that as like, oh my gosh, our freedom's being taken away. And so they're going to fight that. Whereas I think that your generation, I feel like you guys, you have different technology and knowledge that we didn't have. Because if you remember, like all of the ultrasound technology, I'm amazed. Like my youngest is 22 now. And when he was inside my wife, we got ultrasounds and they were blurry and fuzzy like they used to be.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you can go and get an ultrasound and it's like, you can see eyelashes and I mean, it's so detailed.
Yeah.
And I think that has to make a difference. And I know we're kind of veering off into the pro-life issue for a second, but I think that has to make a little bit of a difference when you can show a young woman that their baby is a human living being inside them. I feel like they're going to be less likely to end the life of that child. Whereas in a lot of the older generations, they bought into the lie that, oh, it's a clump of cells.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to see the reality of it.
And that's the thing, is that the big corporations banked on that, not being able to. And that's why when you go to a Planned Parenthood, they don't show you the ultrasound. You're not allowed to see it. But if you go to a crisis pregnancy center, they will show you the ultrasound.
This is real. You can't pretend, because it goes back to that issue of, can you define reality?
True. And people like to make up their own reality. And also they're pushing all of that, false news, completely false, fabricated, where they're just like, this is what a baby looks like at, 23 weeks or something. And it's just like fat or something. They put fat in like a petri dish and they're like, this
Mhm.
is what it looks like. And it's like, that's not true at all. And yet that's the news that that's being spread about. And so that's why it's so important for my generation to be in the faith, because you don't need to be Catholic to be pro-life, but you do need to be pro-life to be Catholic. And I see this like transition of my generation and younger, probably, I think the youngest is probably around 13 or 12. And like from 12 to like however old I am, 24, people coming back into the faith. And I've always wondered like what sparked it. Um, but also I know for a fact that it's good because now we're
Mm.
fighting for life and now we're on the right side
Yeah.
of history. But what do you think sparked that comeback in my generation?
I think so. I think that you guys are starting to wake up a little bit to the big lie
Mm,
that this doesn't work, that you can't just define truth for yourself and that's just how it is. I think there are plenty of people who are going, okay, that's not really practical. It doesn't really represent reality. The other thing I think is the result of this, of everybody getting everything they want in that space, has been nothing but darkness, depression, addiction, and brokenness. So I don't know about you, and it may be kind of anecdotal, but I've talked to other people, it's their experience too. The people that I know and that I've seen that are the most bought into that crazy mindset are the most miserable people at the same time. I've been seeing these things going around about a certain actress who transitioned or whatever, and everyone's like listening to these interviews with her, and she's depressed, miserable, and that's been my experience too. Like the people that I know that have gone all in on that, they seem to be just so unhappy and miserable. And
true.
I think that there are people in your generation that are going either, well, this didn't work because they tried it,
Mm-hmm.
or they're seeing it and going, I don't really want that to be my life.
Right.
So that they're having a reaction to that, and they're seeing the result of it.
Right. And I completely agree with you. I mean, there are so many the media is never accurate about the rates, but I believe it was around 70% of transgender people commit suicide after transitioning. They always say like, "Oh, 70% of transgender people commit suicide," but they don't mention that it's after they've transitioned and they realize that they cannot go back to their old bodies. Their bodies have been mutilated, and people allowed that to happen, especially if they're under 18. I believe it's kids as young as 8 years old now can have gender reaffirming surgery or whatever it's called.
I didn't know it was that young. I didn't know at 8 there was anything to do, but like, um, I guess, I mean, nothing would surprise me at this point in time because I know that the world out there, for some demonic reason, that's exactly what I think it is.
It is.
People that are older have this passionate desire to see that plan, fulfilled in the lives of young people, which I completely don't understand. But I think that that's how they feel like they can capture the culture, is
Mhm.
by blurring those lines and making that happen with younger kids. But I think that there are plenty of other people out there that are just not going to be fooled by that. They're too smart for that. And they're like, look, okay, this doesn't work. You can do all these things and it doesn't really change who you are. And they see the result of that. And what I think it's a stupid idea for their side, because I think if you transition someone or do that to someone that young, and then they're gonna grow out of that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
then while they're still young, they're gonna become a passionate apologist for why that's a bad idea. And I've seen that
exactly.
too. So I feel like people are seeing the result of that mindset and they're saying, no, this isn't gonna work.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it so much too, and I think priests really need to start speaking out more about it. I mean, I'm blessed at Canchus. We have wonderful priests who do, but a lot of people aren't exposed to what's going on in the world because I mean, to an extent, like a lot of Catholics are sheltered. They only listen. I mean, I'm sure they know what's going on, but I don't think they understand to the extent that it's happening. And priests really need to bring these things to their communities and be like, we need to fight against this. We need to make sure that our kids are not being exposed to this. Like, take away their phones and stuff. But a lot of my generation who have come back into the faith, I mean, we have a lot of friends, who are gay, or they put their identity in this, and we try to tell them, like, this is not you. This is not your identity. This is not who you are. It's a lifestyle choice. And a lot of people will say it's not a choice, but one of the guys who actually came up with the gay theory said that it is a choice. It's just interesting how all of this has come to where we are today. Over the years, gay marriage was legalized, and then, they wanted a day, and then they wanted a week, and now it's at a month, and now you can't escape it. It's everywhere all the time. And so I think my generation, we are armored up with Christ, and we are ready to go minister to these people. And, it's unfortunate because I haven't really been able to have any conversations with Gen X, because most of the time they don't want to talk to us, like the younger generations. They want to talk to the millennials. And I always found that interesting, because I'm like, but why? Why is that? But anyways, I guess I know we kind of go all over the place. It's so fun. But I guess kind of coming back is like, how do we reach the people who are thinking about leaving the church?
Yeah.
Those who are, maybe being seduced by these ideologies to leave the church.
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think it starts with us, and it starts with the church itself. I think we have to show other people, we have to model the beauty and joy and devotion of practicing the Catholic faith. We have to show people that, because unfortunately right now, the caricature of Catholicism in the culture is not what we wish it was.
Mm.
And the only way that's ever going to change is if more Catholics put forth a different mindset and a different example. And now I can't do anything about that on a global perspective, but I can do that with the people in my life that have that perspective, and I can show them a different example. Unfortunately, that's the hardest thing.
Right.
Because it's way easier just to say something or make a claim or make a meme or have a t-shirt or, a YouTube channel or whatever. That's the easy thing to do. What's really hard to do is to walk alongside people and show them in real life what it looks like to practice the Catholic faith, and that it's awesome. So I think we have to do that. But you know what else that requires? That requires community. We have to be willing to create community with people, because that's one of the most powerful factors in why somebody stays in the church or not. That's why I'm saying, like, a lot of people, it's not about this, I had this doctrinal thing that happened. No, my friends are all this way, and that's what I want to do. Or somebody who really came alongside me and mentored me that I trusted then began to explain to me why the Catholic Church is not biblical. And we have to counteract that with positive examples and positive community. So I feel like in order to do that, though, that's a big investment that we make in people's lives. It's not a quick fix, and everybody looks for the quick fixes, even Catholics.
Yeah.
We want to know, hey, what's the book I can give to somebody who's thinking about leaving the church? Well, I understand the heart behind that, but do you really think that someone who's thinking about leaving the Catholic Church is going to read a book that you gave them about why they shouldn't? People don't do that.
Yeah.
They're not wanting to stay, so please convince me. They're wanting to go. So you have to present like an equal opposing force of community and example that will make them rethink that. And you have to be willing to walk through the difficult work of relationship and community, because that's hard. It's hard to journey with someone, especially if they're angry at the church and they just want to say nasty, negative things, and they want to be cantankerous with you about the Catholic Church. For you to enter into a relationship with someone like that to help them, it could be kind of soul draining, but that's sort of the point of what Jesus did. Mm-hmm. Imagine Jesus coming down. See, I'm thinking about everything through the lens of the incarnation. Jesus comes down to earth to show the example and to minister to people and to get into the weeds with people and to show them the better way. And that's what he's called us to do. We've got to to be incarnational in our example toward other people. We've got to model that. We've got to be Jesus to them so that they will want Jesus more.
I completely agree. That was wonderful. I also think of Jesus who, had to leave the crowds every now and then for his own self-peace and to minister to himself, in his own relationship with God. And I think it comes down to, as well, if you're not taking care of your own spiritual life, you cannot minister to others.
Absolutely.
Because if you yourself are sick, there's a reason they tell you to put your mask on first before helping somebody else out, on a plane, if the plane goes down. There's a reason for that, because if you cannot, why would you help somebody else if you have not helped yourself first, to be able to help that person? Otherwise, you're not really ministering to that person. You might not be giving them the amount of attention that they need. And that's not good as well. We really do need to have this. It's not selfish either. I think a lot of people think it's really selfish to only pray about themselves or, have their own prayer with God. And it's like, I've had people ask me, they're just like, well, is it okay if I don't pray for others, like during my prayer time? Can I just talk with God? And I was like, yes, like it's fine, offer some people up if you feel called to. But I mean, if you just need that time with God, that's not a selfish thing. We need that time with God because that's how we heal, and then healed people heal people, whereas hurt people hurt people.
Absolutely.
And so we really need to make sure we're taking care of ourselves first and then going out and reaching our hands out to people.
Well, that's part of what we need to model. We need to model to people because this culture in this world is all about self-care,
right?
Self-love, which, okay, let's redeem that. let's redeem that concept, because on the surface, it sounds kind of selfish, which I guess makes sense. But let's talk about why we need to take care of ourselves and what that means. And here's the issue. In society, self-care looks like gratifying the desires of the flesh.
Right.
Okay. But the scripture tells us in Galatians that if you live by the Spirit, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. So self-care really is not about, okay, I just need a me day where I pamper myself and feed my flesh. No, I need a me day in where I fast or in where I serve. Or in where I am just alone with God, not connected to my device that's always calling to me. And that's how I really take care of myself, is by connecting with God, not by, feeding my flesh, because the two forces, the spirit and the flesh, are opposed to one another. So we have to remember, like, real self-care is about taking care of your soul. So it's good to model that too to people so that they understand, because again, people will get into this thing where it's like, okay, self-care. Why am I still filled with anxiety and depression and addiction? Well, it's because by self-care, all you really did was just contribute to your own destruction.
Exactly. And I think that's the issue, is like, society will take what the church has and twist it. We see that all the time. The church says, to live in poverty and to an extent, you know what I mean? And to, mortify ourselves. The world says, minimalism and this and that. They're the same thing. But the issue is that the minimalism is missing God. Without God, we have nothing. So at the heart of everything society is telling us is nothing. And that's why we feel so empty. And like you were saying, they have self-care. Well, we have self-care too, but it's different because it's about controlling our flesh and realizing that when we have control over it, that is when we're truly happy. When God is at the center of our lives, that is when we're truly happy. It's not when we sit in a bubble bath with rose petals for 5 hours, or, or we like sit on the couch eating potato chips and binge watching the latest TV show. That doesn't make us happy. And even in the moment, like, controlling your flesh, mortification, fasting, and all those things. I mean, they have fasting too. It's intermittent fasting, but we have other fasting. It's just crazy to me how all these parallels. But in society, they lack God.
But see, you just made a great point that illustrates something that I was trying to say earlier about how your generation is starting to pick up on the things that my generation was laying down and your generation's going, no. So like this whole minimalism, van life kind of thing that you see out there, where people are like tiny houses, all that kind of stuff. It's like, get rid of all your stuff. That's not from my group, right?
Yeah.
That's and especially not from my parents' group, right? But like my group was about excess. We wanted more. I was a child of the 80s, right? We grew up, we saw all the excess, the mansions, the multiple cars, the closets with 400 pairs of shoes, like all like those were our heroes. Your heroes are the people who live with, in a beat up van and they have absolute less. And they're like, I have discovered the truth that all this stuff doesn't satisfy me. And I'm like, oh, you guys are starting to get on it. You're starting to get it.
We're getting there.
You're getting there. But like you said, without God, though, it's ultimately going to become its own religion that is going to lead to, because here's what's going to happen. It's the same thing, just on different spectrums. You made a point earlier, Amber, about how it's just one thing after another. The message of the world, it just changes forms, right? Like you said, it changes fonts, but it's the same message. My generation thought the bigger and better and more I can have, the happier I'll be. And we wound up addicted to drugs and, bankrupt and broke, right? The crash of 2008, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Your generation is going to go, less is more. I want to be free from all of that stuff and drill down to the deepest part of it, inside of my heart and all this kind of stuff like that. And all of this, well, they're going to find out that what's at the end of that? Right. Darkness, depression, meaninglessness, emptiness. We're all trying to recreate the same thing, filling that void in our heart. It's just throughout history, it vacillates back to which extreme do we go to? And everybody always tries to go the other way of the one that was right before them, because they've seen the excess going this way, going, that didn't work, so I got to go completely the opposite. But what we realize is either one of, either side of a cliff still leads you to death.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which side you pick. You need to stay in the middle, and find the truth that is God.
Right. Yeah. There's that saying where it's in the middle, there's virtue, because there's always an access on one side or the other side, and like for pride, on one side, you could be extremely prideful. On the other side, you don't want anyone to know you exist. They're both forms of pride, but in the middle, there is virtue. And that's where it's like, I feel like we've been on this pendulum going one way and then going the other way. And, I'm just waiting for that pendulum to stop. And I don't know if it will, because it's just human nature as well. And it's one of those things that I'm praying for, to kind of have that, peace, and to have people come back into the faith and to find their true selves. But at the same time, we know how this usually goes. It's one generation goes this way, the other generation goes that way, like you were saying.
Well, the gospel is that middle, Amber, because the gospel affirms that we are sinners, that in and of ourselves, we can do nothing apart from God. So the gospel affirms that about us, that we are worse than we can ever imagine. Okay. And yet at the same time, so that if you just follow that, you wind up in one extreme.
Right.
But at the same time, the gospel also affirms that you are more valuable and loved than you can possibly imagine, and that you have been redeemed by a God who sacrificed himself for you. So both of those things can be true at the same time. Yes, in and of myself and my flesh, I can do nothing. Apart from Jesus, I can do nothing. Jesus said that himself. Yet he also said that I'm giving you my body and blood. I'm going to die for you because you have so much value to the Father, that I'm going to do this. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. Right. So the gospel is the middle. It affirms both our fleshly darkness, but it also shows us the light of Christ. I mean, Jesus says, you are the light of the world. At the same time, he's telling people, look, apart from me, you can do nothing. So our problem is that we haven't realized that the gospel is the middle, right? We think that it's on one of these extremes, just got to get there farther. I'll if I just keep going more in this one direction, I'll get there.
Right.
No, it's not about that. It's about focusing on God and this is the key, letting God reveal to you what truth is. Remember, in Catholicism, this is how it is. Truth is revealed and received. It's not discovered and created. It's revealed by God, and it's received by a heart, by the grace of God. And when we can live in that place, that's going to take care of pride. It's going to take care of depression. So both ends of those spectrums that you talked about, it's really the same thing, just different sides of it. Both of those can be rectified when we receive that truth, because we recognize, yes, it's true. You know, I'm a dirtbag, but in Christ, I can be holy. I can become who God wants me to be. I can actually experience that by God's grace because he loves me. So that keeps me out of falling off that cliff of depression and my life is worthless and meaningless, because I know that I'm loved and valuable. But at the same time, I don't go, well, I'm super awesome and can define truth of myself and I'm the best ever, because I recognize that everything that I have comes from God and it's God's grace. So it keeps us grounded.
Right. No, I love that. That's fantastic. I never even viewed it from that point of view because, you know, I think that's something my generation needs to hear these days, is it's like, just because they went in one extreme, you know, we have the virtue in the middle, which is the Gospels. I mean, we've all had them, but I think we're going to be the generation to really realize that, you know, and come back to that. And I mean, it's kind of scary being that generation that breaks the chain too, you know, because it can be horrifying, you know, having to, you know, go against basically in the entirety of society. I mean, that's kind of what we've always done, but it is very difficult to do. And so, yeah, no, I love that. I do love that. And I guess coming back to our last question really, really quick is, how do we reach people who have left the church already?
I think it's the same answer as the last question. We have to be willing to reach them incarnationally. We have to be willing to not write them off, to not give up on them, and to not say, oh, well, you've abandoned ship. Have fun with that. Enjoy hell. You know, we've got to be willing to still keep the door open to people. You know, imagine all those conversations that are had where a door is slammed, someone walks away, and another person says, if you walk out of here, you can never come back. You know, there are families that have never reconciled after generations because of that conversation. Yeah. I grew in when I was younger. Our neighbor was an old couple who was always alone. They were just this sweet old couple, well into their 80s, and never came around. I asked another neighbor, I said, don't they have kids? Oh yeah, they have kids. Well, how come I never see anybody visit them? Do they live far away? Nope, they live in town. Well, what's the deal with that? Oh, well, before you guys moved in here, there was a big fight, you know, years and years ago. And that's basically what happened. And I remember thinking how tragic that is, that this sweet elderly couple doesn't get to have a relationship with their grandkids and their kids because in an angry fit of rage, someone said, if you walk out that door, you can never come back. And that person said, well, see ya. You know, we have to make sure that the church isn't like that. Yeah. That people know there's always an open door to return and that we care. And not only that, but we will go out after the one lost sheep. I mean, Jesus gives us this model, Amber, to this question. He says, what good shepherd among you who having 100 sheep, if one wanders away, would not leave the 99 to go after the one lost sheep? Sometimes we have to go and minister to that one who's left and minister, but not from a standpoint of, hey, you're in trouble. Right. But a standpoint of what was it? You know, tell me about the darkness you're finding yourself in. Tell me about your pain. Tell me about where you are right now and what that looks like, and be willing to invest in that relationship. So really, I think the answer is ultimately the same from this last question to the second to last question. We need to be like that towards everybody. Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. Wow. Yeah. I mean, to think about it, you know, we always have been told, how do you want to be treated? You know, and if we are harsh towards other people, like, how would we react to that? We have to put ourselves in the other person's shoes and really ask ourselves, like,
what would our reaction be to that? And now some people might get all like huffy and puffy, be like, oh, well, it's fine. Like, I'd be fine if I talked to myself that way. And I'm like, but would you really? No, I don't think so. So that's the thing, is something that I've really tried implementing is when I'm talking to these people, I try to go back to, 2019-year-old Amber, 2019-year-old, whatever, 19-year-old Amber, 18, 17, 16, 13, 12. I hated going to mass. I hated everything about it. I thought it was annoying. I didn't like sitting for a long time. I couldn't eat before we went to mass, so I hated that. Like, I couldn't text my friends. There was just so much that I resented about the Catholic Church before I was even old enough to know anything about it. And honestly, I think that was actually spiritual, to be honest. But the main thing is that, when I came with these concerns, nobody could answer my questions. They were just like, well, we believe this because we do. None of my friends were apologetics. None of my teachers, my catechism teachers or anything, could answer any of my questions. My parents couldn't answer my questions. They did a great job what they could, but at the end of the day, I wasn't getting questions, and I was more or less met with hostility when I answered or when I asked questions. They were just like, well, we just do this because we do. Nobody gave me an answer. So I left, to an extent. I mean, we left as a family, but I wasn't upset about it. I wasn't like, oh no, I can't go anymore.
You were like, sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was just like, now I can sleep over at my friend's house from Saturday into Sunday and no consequences. There were consequences. Oh my gosh. But the main thing being is that I did not understand it through poor catechesis to an extent, but I also didn't have anyone to take me under their wing in the church to be like, hey, this is why we believe this, And so I've decided to kind of become that for younger generations and trying I'm not perfect. I'm not anywhere near being perfect, but being able to answer people's questions when they ask questions and not just be like, well, because we do. It's like, no, that's not going to convince anybody. And you can't, it's not our place to convince anybody, but we do plant the seed, and at least giving them resources is important.
That's huge. That's huge. I like how you are taking it back to putting yourself in that position, because you were there.
Yeah.
And when you think of your mindset, you ask yourself, what would have been helpful to me? What did I need at that point in time? And then for you to be that to another person, you have no idea the ripple effect that can have on someone else. Which, like, when I'm talking to people who are super anti-Catholic Protestants, but they have a speck of openness to at least have a conversation, sometimes people are like, man, how can you talk to people like that? They're so rude and so mean and so wrong. I'm like, I completely understand where they're coming from, because that's where I was too. So I just put myself back in that spot where I go, yep, I remember what it was like to believe that way and think that way. And what did I need? Because I had examples, good and bad, from Catholics when I was in that place. And the good examples that I received are part of the reason why I'm Catholic today.
Right.
And, I don't want to say the bad examples I received were one of the reasons why it took so long, because that wasn't really the point, but it didn't help. Some of those things when I saw negative examples in Catholicism, it didn't help, but the good overcame that.
Right.
And those negative examples are out there for everybody. So we have to be, like I've said before, we have to be the kind of Catholics that we wish everybody was.
Right.
Understanding, like you mentioned, hey, we're not perfect. We're going to mess this up. We're not going to do things right. And that's okay. Jesus understands that. He understood the apostles were going to mess up his sermon illustrations. They're going to be like, oh yeah, there was a time where this guy planted these seeds. And then the other guy goes, that's not what he said. There was never going to be perfection from a human perspective.
Right.
But that's the beautiful thing about our faith, is that it's not about us. It's about Christ and his church, and the promise that he made to his church, that the Holy Spirit would work within us to guide us into all truth. That's a beautiful promise. And we just have to understand, when we become obedient and loving and able to be used by God, we can actually be the answer to somebody else's prayer. I pray all the time that somebody like you would come into the lives of people I know that I can't minister to, right? I'm like, oh God, send someone into their life that they'll listen to. Because we all understand, and when you're older and you have kids, you'll understand this. Like, there are things that someone can say to you, Amber, that you'll listen to, but if your parents said it to you, you'd be like, that's crazy. Yeah, that's just life. Well, somebody's praying for that person that you're having the opportunity to interact with. Dear God, send someone to them to help them. And guess what? God sent you. God sent you. So don't take that lightly. And remember that God sent you specifically for a reason. So let the Spirit of God dwell in you. Ultimately, here's the answer to your question and the ultimate question of how can we help people who are thinking about leaving the church or leave the church? Be led by the Spirit of God. Be so in tune with God that when you are having those encounters, it's not you and your great knowledge and your wonderful personality and your ability to have a witty comeback, okay?
Mm.
It's your being a vessel of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit to minister to that person in the way that God has decided that they need, not that you have decided. So be an open vessel and let the Lord lead you in that, and you'll be amazed at what can happen.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's something that we really do need to focus on. And I think that's the perfect place to kind of end our discussion. That's amazing. Yeah, I have nothing else to add. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. But I definitely think that this will help plenty of my generation trying to figure out how on earth do we minister to these people. And on top of that, what we're being hit with, with all of this LGBTQ stuff that's going on. And there's even a war in the LGBTQ now. They're trying to separate the LGBT from the Q plus. I don't know what's happening. But the thing is that we need this type of support. And I definitely do think that we are going to get that support. I'm sorry if you guys can hear my mom in the background. But we're definitely going to be getting that support, and we have people like Keith who are willing to help us as well. And so thank you so much, Keith, for coming on and just helping us out and talking to us. This was fantastic.
Well, it's my honor to get to talk to you. And I want to just encourage everybody to keep going in your faith and keep moving forward. And if you feel like you're not worthy to do anything and like, what could God ever do with me? Understand, yeah, you're right. But also understand this, you're here for a reason. So in him, you can do all things, and he's chosen you and he's ready to work in and through you, but you need the power of the Holy Spirit, but it's available. He's available and he wants to do a great work in your life.
That's so fantastic. Yes, I completely agree. And where can my listeners find you?
So if you go to YouTube, you can search for me there. I'm pretty active on YouTube, Keith Nestor. And I also have, if you want to pray the rosary with us, Rosary Crew with Keith Nestor. I'm on Instagram at Keith Nestor Catholic, Twitter at Keith Nestor 1. And I have a website for my ministry, kind of it's the hub of all things, downtoearthministry.org. And that's down the number 2, earthministry.org.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Keith, for coming on. I really appreciate it. We always have a good time. And with all of that being said, I hope that you guys enjoyed this podcast, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to A Catholic's Perspective with me, The Religious Hippie. Make sure to visit my official website at thereligioushippie.com, and while you're there, be sure to sign up for my newsletter to keep up to date with my latest news and offerings. You can also find me on virtually any social media site as The Religious Hippie. Thanks for listening.
'Tis the season to shine with H&M. Discover the holiday collection and find fashionable pieces for your wardrobe or for under the tree. Get inspired and dazzle with this year's glam. From tuxedo styles, bow detailed pieces, impressive prints, and more. From unforgettable looks to unforgettable gifts. With fashion finds to home decor, find it all at H&M. Treat your loved ones and yourself this season. Shop in-store or at hm.com.
A quest is a search for something. And every week, the Quest podcast will show you how we know what we know through interviews with people that have incredible stories of dedication and perseverance. I'm your host, Todd Fisher. Join me in this thought-provoking and inspiring podcast of discovery. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Amber Rose and distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright by The Religious Hippie, NFP. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for The Religious Hippie at thereligioushippie.com or find me on social media for other unique content.